From a flightless simulator at Ferris Air to a momentous meeting in an alley to the complex mind of an architect to every far sector in space and to the brilliance of the central power battery on Oa. This is the podcast that covers the adventures of all of your favorite ring slingers. This is the Emerald Echo with your hosts, Adam and the Emerald Enthusiast.
Welcome to another episode of Emerald Echo, a Green Lantern podcast and Vidcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam, and with me, as always, is the Emerald Enthusiast himself, Donnie. Donnie, how's it going?
What's up, comic book fans? It's the man whose ring runs on fanboy energy. It is the Emerald Enthusiast, and we're here to talk about one of the most important stories in Green Lantern history. We're talking about Green Lantern Rebirth.
Indeed we are, and this is a very important sort of... Actually, before I say that, I just want to assure our viewers and listeners that we are not suddenly skipping the rest of Kyle's journey. We are
Definitely not.
We're going back to that. We're just taking a little detour forward in honor of the upcoming Green Lantern #1, which is coming out in May, I believe. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Next month.
Just a couple of weeks, and I've already ordered all the variant covers.
Yeah, I didn't order all the variant covers. I just ordered one cover, but mine is on order. And it required some readjusting of my physical pull list to make Green Lantern be a part of that. But I had to do it. It had to be done, and so that's where we are. But so that's why we're taking this detour. Now I know you said it's a very important story in terms of the history of Green Lantern.
Yes.
It's a very important story for my history with Green Lantern because it is actually the first Green Lantern series that I picked up in periodical format, so the monthlies.
Okay.
And it was really my friend Dave, who is no longer with us, who he turned me on to the Green Lantern character. And I had just, based on his recommendation, I remember I just picked up the first Kyle trade chronicling his beginnings as the Green Lantern. I think it's I can't remember what it's called, a New Dawn, I think it is.
Yes, it's Emerald Twilight and retroactively named a New Dawn.
Yeah. And so I picked that up. And then shortly on the heels of me picking that up, they announced Rebirth. And David said, "Oh, you got to start picking that up when it comes out monthly." So he was the kind of advocate for Green Lantern, and so that's why this story is very important. Brought back a lot of memories while reading it, and reminded me of some good times. So it's a very important story for me in that regard. So I guess the best thing we can do is just to kind of sort of set the scene, give some background on where the characters are at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's yet another thing that I need to say. I need to preface this. As most of you know, and I feel like we need to put this out there. This is an important story, but the artist, the penciler, I mean that specifically, is a very controversial figure in the comic book world. In no way are we subscribing to his views by reviewing this. We don't believe in any kind of gatekeeping, and that was an important issue when I first met Adam, as I was like, my goal is to put as many comic books in as many hands as possible. I want everyone, regardless of their walk of life, to share in this journey and share in the joy.
Or on your iPads or however you get your comics.
You're right. Right. Exactly.
However you consume them.
He always throws me curveballs. So anyway.
I have to listen. I don't want to alienate the people that do it digitally.
Right. But my point being is that we're just going to refer to this person as the artist because we don't want anyone thinking that in any way we also subscribe to those views, because as time has gone on, he's gotten more and more controversial. So
and look, the book features some very strong, fantastic looking pages, and I can't deny that aspect of it.
We're not going to deny the talent.
So the talent is there. Just we have no inclination to highlight the human being behind the hand that draws those images. So
yes. So I'm going to set you up a little bit here. This basically launches after Green Lantern Volume 3, number 181. And Hal Jordan at this point, as you can see on the very first cover, is the Spectre. John Stewart, also a Green Lantern at this point. He got another ring during Volume 3. Guy Gardner, long story here, and I don't want to sidetrack it, but he is the Warrior, which you saw him show up several times in Volume 3.
Not
he
the
has
Ultimate Warrior, just want to...
No, although there is kind of a resemblance there.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
But he is the Warrior. It was discovered that he had partial alien DNA, Voldarian DNA. That's where he is.
Yeah. So the gang's all here.
Yes, the gang is all here.
Which is what Donnie is trying to say. All right, let's get rolling.
So issue number 1 opens up with a spaceship careening towards Earth, and it crash lands, and we see that it is Kyle inside. And he is hurt, and he says, he's muttering, "You can't be afraid, you can't be afraid." And then he says, "It has a name, it has a," and he passes out. And we see that he is right next to not only his own personal power battery, but a coffin.
Yeah, that's an ominous way to start the series for sure. And it's funny because when started, I remember the first time I read this, because I was just simultaneously reading the graphic novel that I mentioned. And so you see Kyle's costume in that, and then you see Kyle's costume in this, and it's slightly different because of the ion, aspect of it.
Right.
And so I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait a minute, somebody got a wardrobe change along the way here.
Yeah. He got a couple of those towards the end.
I had no context of why or how, but it was just, all right, I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah, well, again, at this point, I don't want to sidetrack things too much with too much history because this is the story we're dealing with. We will get to that as we do more Kyle podcasting.
Yes.
But I will say that there actually is a really nice action figure of that out there in this specific costume.
Yeah. It was pretty solid.
Yeah.
There are Kyle's had some good figures along the way, which I'm sure you have mostly all of them, if not all of them. It's my guess.
They're pretty much all of them in doubles and triples and autograph versions and so on and so forth.
We wouldn't have it any other way. Let's.
So back to the story. The scene cuts to Carol Ferris looking at the remnants of Ferris aircraft. Yeah. And she's just kind of walking through, and guess who she runs into?
I wonder.
Well, actually, at first, what she said is she sees the old jet that says H. Jordan on it.
Yeah. She's kind of like wiping the dust and thing away with her hand, and then that's when you see the imprint or the.
So kind of setting the scene here. The old is this was 10 years after Emerald Twilight, and so now we're talking about setting the stage for what worked before Kyle Rayner
was it
came
actually that long in like actual time?
There's a lot of debate among fans about that. Timelines are screwy things, especially when
Comics,
let's just say it's been a few years. I don't remember if there was ever a specific time frame mentioned, but yes, it was 10 years in actual time between these two stories.
Okay, all
right. So then the scene cuts to the Bronx. We see John Stewart with his Green Lantern ring, and he is accompanying Guy Gardner to a baseball game. And they're having an interesting discussion here about Hal Jordan. They mentioned Evil Star, and that's a very classic Green Lantern villain. And I will say, let me talk a little bit about the art here. I don't like everything the way it's drawn, but I do like some of the expressions here. The initial exchange between Guy Gardner and John Stewart, I think the expressions, at least here, look very good.
I would agree. Here, they're pretty strong. I do have some issues with certain things in the art.
And I'll talk about that later.
A lot of it is awesome, but there are points where I find it a little bit kind of wonky for my taste. But yeah, no, here it was great. Like even not just the expressions on the character's face, but the baseball field, the crowd, all that peripheral stuff looks good as well, right?
Yeah. And I really like, right off the bat, Jeff Johns, he really nails the voice of Guy Gardner. Now, I do have an issue with some of the way that Guy was written later on in this series, but he gets that kind of, snarky, very overconfident kind of voice. And John goes, "That's plenty, Guy," and uses a construct to shut his mouth, which I thought was hilarious.
Which is, if I had a Green Lantern ring, there'd be a lot of that going on.
Yeah. And then Guy activates his warrior powers, and he's huge and all jacked with the W, T-shirt on, which I just thought was really cool. So it was great to see them back interacting here, knowing that we've got Hal and Kyle in the ring, in the wings here. So yeah. And speaking of, guess who shows up at the game immediately? Yeah. And this is Hal Jordan as the Spectre. Now, he's not the Spectre here, but again, this is not Hal Jordan in corporeal form.
Right. Yeah. Now, see, that always kind of threw me for a loop.
Right, because he looks like Hal Jordan here.
He's physically there. Other people can see him. So what's exactly going on there was always my question.
Yeah. If you didn't know the ability of the Spectre to to assume human form again.
Yeah, see, I didn't know that at the time.
Right.
So I was like, wait, how? I get he's a Spectre, but shouldn't he be a Spectre?
In the cloak, right.
Yeah, not even in the cloak, but okay, maybe through some shenanigans, John and Guy can see him, but everybody at the friggin' baseball game, hey, look who they,
Exactly. The funny thing is they don't just perceive a human.
Yeah.
They start to be influenced by the holiness aspect of the Spectre.
Yeah.
And they start to come up to him and admit all of the sins in their lives, including Guy Gardner. And I remember the first time I read this, I laughed out loud. He goes, I cheated on my taxes.
That was pretty funny. Yeah.
And this is when Hal says, "John, I can't stay. The spirit of vengeance won't give me a break anymore." And then he just vanishes.
Yeah, because he's hearing every sin from everybody in that stadium. And it's like, oof.
Yeah.
That would be something to have to deal with. And imagine having to, if he's going to carry out his duties, it would require him to, enact vengeance on the sinners, right? So imagine what that would look like at a baseball game.
Exactly. So then we cut to the scene here. We see, of course, it makes sense that Oliver Queen would show up in this story. Obviously, we know the history there with Green Arrow and Green Lantern.
Yeah.
But not long after that, we see a villain show up, another very familiar face, if you're familiar with the Green Lantern mythos, that being Black Hand.
It's funny because, you try, as you're reading it now on a reread, you know exactly where that's going to go, what that's going to lead to. So you see the building blocks kind of starting to be laid, right? But I remember on first viewing, I'm like, oh, okay, this must be some throwaway Green Lantern villain just to sort of, add some action, sequences and things of that nature.
Right. And in I wouldn't classify Black Hand as like the top 5 to this point, that like the top 5 Green Lantern villains.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's on his way
But he
there.
would become that way under Jeff Johns' writing.
Yeah.
One of the top. So,
Yeah.
and what we see that he's doing here is he has tracked Hal Jordan's ring, and he's trying to take possession of it. And just as he does that, surprise, surprise, here comes an arrow right through the hand. Ouch. And of course, that's Green Arrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And not going to lie, when I was looking at and rereading that page, that scene, I was kind of humming the Arrow theme from the TV show as I was reading that. And I was like, I put it in there. I'm like, you have filmed the city, even though it wasn't on the page, but I threw it in just for fun. I also said that to my TV on Thursday night when the Leafs were skating up. But that's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother story.
It's a whole nother story.
So, and just like that, who appears right in the middle of this drama? But again, Hal Jordan.
Yeah.
And initially, it's just Hal in his, in his flight jacket. But interestingly, as he's transforming to the Spectre, note the symbol that's kind of forming behind him. Now, we're going to see in this that it's actually not just Hal Jordan as the Spectre, that he is inhabited by Parallax. Now, if you've only been familiar with Volume 3, Hal Jordan was Parallax. In this story, we're going to start to see that Parallax is a different character who is in control partially of Hal Jordan at this point.
The interesting thing, too, though, I think that the story does a good job of is later on, we do get, backstory flashbacks to that period.
Yes. And and it does talk about that. There's quite a few references to other stories here. There's references.
One issue is mostly flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a reference to Final Night when we thought, at least for a while, we thought Hal Jordan was completely dead, completely gone. We weren't sure.
I love how we have to quantify that in comic book discussions. Like they're partially dead, somewhat dead, or dead as a doorknob. Uncle Ben dead.
Exactly.
Uncle Ben is like on a scale from Superman, which means he's coming back.
Right.
But to Uncle Ben, he ain't coming back. So there's a barometer, right? And somewhere in the middle at this point was Hal Jordan.
Yeah, exactly. So turns out he's only mostly dead, not all dead. Yeah. And of course, now at this point, he transforms into the Spectre and says the Spectre must deliver vengeance. And in a very gruesome scene here, he turns Black Hand's hand to actual ash. So it becomes an actual Black Hand.
Right. So now he's actually going to live up to his moniker.
Right. Exactly. And that's what he said. He's like, you're going to live up to your name here.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, he turns and you see Hal Jordan give a glance to Ollie, and he's like, but this isn't me. This isn't who I am. So we can see that Hal is struggling not only with Parallax, but the Spectre too.
Yeah, because even at this point, Oliver is having an issue with how far Hal / the Spectre is going.
And you even see you see the hand like completely cut off, and like the gory remains on the wrist there.
Like there was a point where Oliver had his arrows, lined up towards the Spectre, and I'm like, yeah, but is that really good? Like, I mean, cool, you're doing the right thing. You want to, you're trying to save this piece of crap from the hand.
Yeah.
But like, is that arrow really gonna do much of anything against the Spectre?
Right. It would have to be just kind of reflex. That's what he's doing, but not necessarily believing that it could have any kind of effect. And what's kind of, I guess, morosely funny here is, Green Arrow mentions the hand turns the coal. And later on at the very end of the story, you kind of see him sweeping up the remnants. It's the coal and the bones and everything.
Yeah. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. Then the scene cuts back to Guy and John, and this time they're at the Warriors Bar, and this one is the one in New York City. We're not talking about the one on Oa.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see once again they start having this discussion about Hal Jordan and the things that happened in the past, including Final Night, where he eventually relit the sun. By the way, I really like that story. I don't want to go too far into it here because we don't want to get sidetracked.
Yeah, we'll get to
But
it.
hopefully we get to that eventually because I really did like the way that
We
ended.
will.
Yeah. So at this point, Guy's having a couple beers, and the next thing you know, this is where the story took kind of a weird turn for me. All of a sudden, Guy looks like he's exploding, and he even says, "Skin's on fire." So
Yeah.
what was, being that this was like kind of your first kind of
I have no idea what was going on.
Okay.
I was
I
like,
wondered.
what?
I was like,
I'm like, huh?
yeah.
Like, what? Like, I was just getting used to the Spectre and all the crap that he could do.
Yeah.
You know, and that Undertaker motif that I kind of dug. Like, cool. And then we have, you know, Guy exploding. But I gotta tell you, I was fascinated. He seemed to have like life-size statue of Hal Jordan in the bar. And I'm like, wait a minute. For a guy that you supposedly can't stand.
Right.
And even John calls him on this. Like, you know, you say you don't care about the ring, but you've got, you know, memorabilia and thing commemorating the Green Lantern. Yeah. So what gives here, right?
When you said the Undertaker motif, you know, it would be cool if like when Hal Jordan was the Spectre, like Tom Kalmaku was walking behind him going, "Oh yes."
No, but I mean, that's why I laughed when Oliver had the arrow pointing at him. I'm like, that's like somebody, you know, when the Undertaker sits up and they start kicking him. It's like, what's that going to do? It's not going to do anything. It's pointless.
Exactly.
You know,
so yeah. And at this point, it really looked, you know, Guy is basically explodes.
Yeah.
And this is where I was looking at this part of the story, and I was like, okay, that's really weird. And now we cut to Belle Reve, and we see another familiar Green Lantern villain, and that is Hector Hammond.
That's a big head.
Yeah, again, the artist here does a really good job of this particular villain. I will say that.
Yeah, he did look really like the art looked really creepy on him, and it makes you looking at Hector Hammond. It's automatic that even if before he says a word, and so this is my first. Imagine reading back then. This is my first vision of Hector Hammond, and I'm like, yeah, this guy looks like a sickle, like a creep, like he's disturbed.
Yeah.
And it's not just his big head. It's just he has that you know that creepy look on his face. He looks like a scumbag. Basically.
Right. So then the scene quickly cuts to the Watchtower, and we see the very gory remnants of Guy Gardner, and Martian Manhunter and Batman are standing next to him, and they're trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah. And it's always cool to see Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
I think he's an underused character, but I like to see him there. And what's funny is just right at the first time you see Batman, he ain't having any of this. He's like, you know.
Yeah.
Instantly, his guard he's like, all right, enough of this. You know, he's like, all right, I've had enough, and we're just starting.
It leads to one of my favorite moments, an exchange between Hal Jordan. We'll talk about that in a minute. Not long after that, we see Barry Allen, and he's headed to Hal Jordan's old apartment.
Right, because it seems like something's going on in the remnants of Coast City at this point.
In fact, you know, you're talking about, you know, again, Batman's having none of this. There's a panel where, you know, Batman looking very kind of villainous almost in silhouette says, "I don't think Hal Jordan ever changed, John." You know.
Yeah. What's funny is because when Batman was in the shadow, I liked the way the artist drew him.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we started to see Batman, like in actual, like there with proper lighting and stuff, I wasn't so keen on the aspects of the way he was drawn.
A little overly villainous.
Particularly again, to me, the ears were too long. I'm like, well, you know, what are we talking about here? They were Kelly Jones length almost, and I'm like, that's a bit too long for me.
Yeah. I will say,
folks, with Batman's ears. But I digress.
This does lead to one of my favorite Jon Stewart moments ever. And, again, Batman throwing a lot of shade at Hal Jordan. Jon Stewart gets right up in his face and says, "What is Batman when you're not afraid of him? Just a man." And I'm like, John is not going to take any of your stuff, Bruce.
Yeah, which is I would expect, if you're going to have characters that are supposed to not have any fear or be able to combat their fear, then you can't have them be afraid of a guy whose whole thing is strike fear into the hearts of people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it makes sense.
And later on, Hal actually says that, Bruce believes in everything I don't.
Yeah, you can see why they're opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this issue ends with Ferris Air suddenly being completely rebuilt, just out of thin air.
I mean, that's a great way if you have some renovations. I mean,
yeah. Carol Ferris, who's there, she's shocked, and all of a sudden we see, again, it's Hal, this time again, back in his flight jacket, and he's like, "Hello, Carol, just out for a walk."
Yeah. It's amazing how somebody that's dead can just go for a walk.
Exactly.
Whenever he wants.
So, yeah. So are we just gonna rate kind of this whole story? Yeah. Yeah. Again, I have to call out, I do like the cover of issue 2.
Once we hit issue 3, we'll take our break portion.
We'll take a break. Sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll take a break right here on Multiverse Musings, the Vidcast.
Issue 3.
Okay.
We're still.
We're on issue 2. After issue 3, that's when we'll take our break.
Yeah, and then Donnie can do his plugs and shameless, all that shameless plugs. All the good stuff.
But again, I do want to call attention to the cover. You see Hal Jordan in his Green Lantern uniform, with blood-streaked hands and kind of the representations of many deceased Green Lanterns, kind of hovering around him.
I'm telling you, it's the Undertaker motif. You people know, I'm talking just about, it's there.
Yeah.
He's cloaked. He's and by the way, the Spectre looks like what I'm talking about, the mini streak in our Undertaker.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
That's a good point. So, this issue cuts back to New Mexico. Kyle Rayner is down again. His ship has crashed, and he is obviously in a bad way. You can see that he's all blood strewn around his nose and his mouth, and he's saying, "I have to show them all. I saw it," and then he passes out again.
He's having a rough go.
And then the ring itself starts to transmit this message: "Parallax is coming. Parallax is coming,"
which is very ominous. And
mm-hmm.
At this point in my initial read, I wasn't familiar with, all right, what's a parallax? Thankfully, I would come to know that it's not the poop cloud that was its depiction in the Green Lantern movie.
Well, you do see a little bit of the influence of this story on the movie, but it should have had a lot more influence because there were things about that didn't work that obviously did work here.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things we see, I really like this one panel. There's a flashback, and we see Hal Jordan having a conversation with Carol Ferris. She's his boss now, remember, at this point.
Yes.
But she's giving him a look like, "I really like what you're selling there, big man."
Yeah. At some point, we're going to have some fun.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to go for flight practice, and there ain't going to be no planes involved.
Yeah.
That's what she was emitting.
And then Hal references, though, the first time we ever met, that being the death of his dad, who flew for her dad.
Yeah.
But we see that, kind of in a flashback way, we see that drawn again and that acted out again. And really horrific. And you can see the kind of effect that had on Hal Jordan.
Yeah, it was. Talk about influencing the movie. I think that scene is one of them that made its way into the movie. But, yeah.
And here's a quote that really, kind of encapsulates what's going on here. Hal tells Carol, "I need to find a way back." And she's like, "Back to where?" And he says, "Back to who I was." And that's really what this is about, is him finding his way to being.
So they're laying the groundwork. Yeah, you see, because at this point we don't know what's in that coffin.
Right, and at this point, and that again, that gets explained as the various issues go on. So,
And you could be like, if you're reading this for the first time, unaware. I don't know how you do that in 2023, but let's pretend you could. You could kind of make the conclusion that maybe Parallax, whatever that is in there. You know, like, but the first assumption wasn't, oh, it's Hal Jordan's body.
yeah. Well, again, he was calling himself Parallax. So seeing that it's Hal Jordan, but then again, Hal Jordan was the Spectre after he was Parallax. So all of a sudden he's saying Parallax is coming. We were kind of left to guess what's going on here because we're seeing Hal Jordan as the Spectre. So what's Parallax at this point?
Yeah, exactly.
So now at Ferris Air, suddenly the Justice League shows up because they have located Hal Jordan. Yeah.
I like how the Justice League was used in this book. It was very much like, of course, they would take interest in what was going on, right? Because the last time they interacted with Hal Jordan, it wasn't the best interaction, which you can kind of understand Batman's point of view. It's like, well, why should I trust this? Like,
yeah.
Usually, when somebody comes back from the dead in these instances, 9 times out of 10, with Superman being the 10, it doesn't end well.
Right.
Good does not come from that. So, so you can understand Batman's sort of concern and apprehension.
Well, and if I remember correctly, actually in the story, The Final Night, when Hal Jordan showed up and there, several heroes were like, "Oh, you're back," and he's like, "No, I'm not back.
Yeah.
I'm here to take care of this problem, but I'm not back."
Yeah.
So things go quickly from bad to worse because we start to see John act out of character. Something is influencing him. Yes.
It's not alcohol.
Right? Not at all. And I also like this one interaction here. I know he was under the influence of Parallax, but Superman flies up and confronts John, and he's like, "Hey, you've got to stop, get it under control." And John's like, even the strongest structures have their weak points, and he hits Superman in the eyes and shows you the destructive power of a Green Lantern when he really knows what he's doing, especially when he's familiar with the foe he's fighting.
Right.
Because he hurts Superman here.
Right. And I guess the eye would be, even for Superman, the weaker. It would have, at the very least, disorient him enough to temporarily slow him down.
So back in the Watchtower, what we see is that Guy's human DNA is overriding his Voldarian DNA. And this is a very important point of the story too. Hal's ring that Ollie has, his old ring, replicates itself. And one of the rings flies onto Guy's finger. And we hear the phrase again, Parallax is coming, but at this point, Guy gets up and he is once again the Guy Gardner that we knew, the Green Lantern Guy Gardner with the vest and everything. And note here, I will say this, I like the way that the ring is drawn with the power kind of seeping out of it. Like he has so much will that his ring can't contain it. I like that. Yeah.
And later on, that's going to come into play because even Hal talks about it, like when he's sort of narrating giving us some backstory on each of the other lanterns.
That's one of the strengths of this story is it talks about the feelings of the ring, what it's like to wear it, what it's like to pour your will into one of these things, what it's like to use it.
Yeah, Kyle and Oliver talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so back in New Mexico, now we see both Kilowog and Ganthet show up. And at the end of this issue, we actually see what is in the coffin, and it is Parallax. And I mean specifically Hal Jordan as Parallax, the way we saw him in volume 3, right?
With the gray hair, the gray temples. Mm-hmm. See, and again, here we go. We got coffins. So again, the Undertaker stuff is that Now that I'm thinking about it, it's even more prevalent.
But yeah, so again, I like the way that ended. And again, Ganthet and Kilowog showing up. I mean, remember, Kilowog also showed up back again, was reborn near the end of Volume 3. He was the Dark Lantern for a while. Yeah. And I'll have to say this about Rebirth, though. And a certain percentage of our audience will think this is hilarious, and some of them will be like, what are you talking about? So the cover of not of Volume 3, but issue number 3, we see Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, Hal Jordan as Parallax, and Hal Jordan as the Spectre. And later on, we see these 3 distinct entities all within the same body fighting for control.
Which was really cool.
Which really was. But it reminded me recently of the whole Bloodline thing. And I had this image in my head of Artist Collective Sami Zayn begging El Generico to help him fight off Sammy Uso.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got you with that one, didn't I?
Oh, that was funny. Oh, God.
I even said that to somebody online, and they cracked up, and I'm like, okay, these are just the things that go through my head here. So.
That's funny.
So this issue starts out with, again, Kilowog acting, again, under an influence here, and he and Ganthet are squaring off. And boy, is that a battle of heavy hitters.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's devastating.
Mm-hmm. And you can see Ganthet's power level here.
And also really simpler times when, you looked at those blue little Smurfs and be like, oh, those are the good guys.
Mm-hmm. Except when they were purple.
I remember how blissfully, naive I was when I first read this thing. Oh, yeah, those guys are the good guys.
Exactly.
And then as you continue to read Jeff Johns' run, it's like, oh.
Well, again, yeah.
Maybe not.
It's, most of the time. Other times it's questionable.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was good. Again, visually, those two going at it was spectacular. So you got to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah. So not long after that, we see Hal Jordan returning to a rebuilt but empty Coast City. And one of the things here that I like, there's a flashback, and this lady comes out and he says, I heard you giggling, Mr. Jordan. What did I tell you about bringing girls in here late night? And he was like, it's the television Miss Broom. An allusion to John Broom, one of Hal Jordan's co-creators.
Right.
So.
Now, my question is, was it actually the television? I don't buy that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure not.
I think what was happening was there was a lot of clicking going on, and so,
yeah,
hey, good for you. Hal is known for that, the prowess in that area.
Hal likes the ladies, yes.
Yeah, good for you. And so does Kyle.
And so does Guy, yeah.
That's why I gravitate to the Green Lantern mythology. I think that's it.
So we see Hal Jordan pick up his battery in this apartment and says, who did all of this? Who brought it all back?
Yeah.
And then we see the reflection. I really like this in the battery of Parallax. And he's like,
that's a great visual.
You did, Jordan.
That's a great visual.
Yeah. And remember now, when Hal Jordan became Parallax in issue 48 of Volume 3, when he became Parallax and starts to, well, when he started in on his path in issue number 48, in his point of view, he was setting things right. He had so many past issues with the Guardians, and he was like, look at where it's got me. I'm out saving everyone else in all of these other worlds, but my life is destroyed here.
No, I think he was. I mean, we covered that event in the podcast before, but way back when we first started. But on paper, he was wanting to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's that saying about power, right?
Right.
Too much power corrupts, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
absolute power corrupts.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. And that's what ultimately led to Hal Jordan's susceptibility to parallax. Is giving into that.
And we see that play out here. Interesting quote. Kyle says, to Ganthet, you better hope. And Gamp that says hope is meaningless against fear, Green Lantern of Sector 2814. And I'm like, well, that's interesting considering, he was the one who helped St. Walker create the Blue Lanterns later on.
Which,
so feelings change.
I need one of those rings, especially for tonight. But anyway, I don't have a Blue Lantern ring, damn it. I gotta buy one. Anyway, carry on.
So again, we're starting to see Hal Jordan again. We get images of him struggling with parallax. And then the Spectre appears. Again, all of them fighting for control of Hal Jordan. And, and the Spectre says, vengeance, we must deliver. And Hal Jordan's like, Spectre, the spirit of vengeance must not fail. And again, all of these, entities, they're all fighting for control of the same body.
Yeah, and so that was, it looked visually, it looked fantastic. But needless to say, I remember the first time I read it, I was confused. I was like, wait a minute. What is going on here? Like, how is this happening? Like, I get that. And at first, in my head, sort of headcanon, I equated it to, and maybe this is it's partially still true, but I equated it to, remember the scene in Superman 3 where he's fighting against himself, like Clark is fighting Superman?
Yeah, right.
But it's more of it's a mental battle being played out physically for the sake of, hey, it's a movie and we can't have this guy, talking to himself and smacking himself in the face on one side and then smacking. Imagine how stupid that would look. But that's what I equated it to, right? Like something similar to that, but we're talking about the Spectre and Parallax, so it's not inconceivable that those three entities could be standing in front of each other.
But we do get the backstory here as to what was going on with Kyle. And it seems that he flew to this distant planet. It says on the 10th planet from the sun, Pelagus. The beings that lived there, they were gripped with fear when they saw my ring. And we see the first image of Parallax, kind of, in
he looks like a bug-like creature.
Exactly, kind of scrawled on the wall. And we see that. And not long after that, we see the first actual representation, a yellow entity that was made of living fear.
I imagine if they used that design for the movie.
So much better. Why not?
Anyway, it's interesting that you mentioned that where Kyle's been and how he got there and that whole scenario. If you read the version I reread, which was the book, it's the omnibus of it's book one of Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run, the omnibus version. So it has that initial 5-page story, or it's like 5 or 10 pages. That 5 or 10-page story, whatever it is, that you see Kyle go to that planet and have that interaction. So you actually, in the version I read, I actually read that. I got to watch it play out. Whereas if you're reading just the regular Rebirth issues, you won't see that actual.
Right. And that's what I like about a lot of times when DC goes back and revisits things and fleshes things out. Some people don't like that. They're like, it's too much to read. It's too much to buy. I want to get, I want to have the story fleshed out. I want to see every little detail eventually. So
like I even, just not to get ahead, but if once you get in that book, once you get past Rebirth, there is a one-shot that it was written by Jeff Johns and done by Darwin Cook. Before the next Green Lantern #1 kicks off.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's in this because I have several.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, several. This is actually the deluxe edition. I think that one's in here. But anyway, I have so many versions I forget what's what. But yeah. Anyway, so back to the story. Actually, there and really cool, and I think this is a really good value. There is a DC Direct 2-figure box set that you can buy, and it has Sinestro and Hal Jordan.
Oh, okay.
And you also get the trade paperback of Green Lantern Rebirth in it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which in and of itself, and you can usually find this for about $25 plus shipping online. It's not it's really not that hard to find, and it's not overly expensive.
Oh, that's
So,
great.
Yeah. So now we start to see the backstory here that it was actually Parallax all along influencing step by step Hal Jordan, including the gray streaks in his hair. That was kind of the first, sign that Hal Jordan was being influenced by this entity.
Now, a couple of things. So when you said it was Parallax all along, I started thinking of the song in WandaVision. It was Agatha all along. You're done.
If I could sing, I'd sing that. But it was Parallax all along.
Then you said Step by Step, which reminded me of my sister when she was a kid used to love this boy band, New Kids on the Block, and that was one of their freaking songs. Yeah. And the reason I know that is because she used to play the freaking song over and over again. In my opinion, Bat Dance by Prince was better. But anyway, I digress. And the third thing is that you were saying that the gray temples were the telltale sign. Donnie, I'm very concerned now because I'm starting to notice some gray tinges in the mustache and the beard. And I don't know if that's parallax or probably stress from watching the Leafs. Probably option number 2, but I digress.
Yeah. So if you suddenly start beating up your friends, I'll be concerned. So anyway. But now we get to the crux of the story here. It says after the destruction of Coast City, Parallax made Jordan afraid of what might happen tomorrow, afraid of the future. And so now we get a revisiting of Emerald Twilight here, the events that happened there, including him. At the time, we assumed that he killed Sinestro, and obviously that turned out to be very different.
He might have stealed him,
right? So exactly. He DDT'd him. I love that part.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the things that maybe gravitate to Daryl Banks.
And that's why, and this is the beauty of the Green Lantern, because it's got that association with the wrestling. We can throw all these references in, and it makes sense.
But now you see the first representation here. It says the cosmic parasite grafted itself onto Jordan's soul. And you see how Jordan asked Parallax, but again, with the entity behind him.
Yeah.
Like in control here. So again, changing the game here, figuring out a way to, make this next phase work without resorting to how Jordan was a clone or was a villain in disguise or whatever.
And there's that scene where he opens his mouth and it's like, he looks like one of those aliens from, Alien or Predator, right? He has that really, creepy look. That looks really cool. So I will give credit to the artist who shall not be named for that.
And I really like one of the panels here. You actually see Parallax within Hal Jordan, pull Hal Jordan's flesh apart.
That was
a lot of creepy stuff here.
Very horror infused.
Yeah. And he says, Parallax lives, I was like, this was just really, really cool
Why does your version of Parallax sound like Christian Bale's Batman?
Where's the trigger? Anyway, so we cut back to Ollie and Kyle, and all of a sudden, Oliver is attacked by yellow arrows.
Which can only mean one thing.
Which can only mean one thing. And guess who shows up? Surprise, surprise. He's not dead. It's Sinestro.
Mostly dead, but again.
He's mostly dead, but
well, actually, in this case, it was a ruse.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit about how that happened, but again, Sinestro shows back up, and he says, "Who else? What's causing all of this?" Of course, it's Sinestro. Yeah. And if there's one character that this artist style I think lends itself to very well, it's Sinestro. The kind of the long
Sinestro
arm.
and Hector Hammond. Yeah.
Yeah.
The creepy villainous. The creepy villainous characters. I wonder if there's something to that, but I digress. I digress.
Oh boy. Anyway.
But the shoe fits.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There you go. But the wrinkles on the forehead and the sinister look, we get all that.
What's funny? I saw somebody in the crowd on Thursday at the Leaf game. I wasn't there. I saw it on TV, and he had the mustache that twirls. And I'm like, that's borderline Sinestro. I wouldn't be walking around with that mustache.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's the end of issue number 3. So we should take our break.
We'll take our quick break. So grab a snack, grab a drink, and be right back for the final 3 issues and then our rating. And we'll be right back. So stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere.
What's up, everyone? It's the Emerald Enthusiast. For all of your multiverse viewing and listening needs, check out our shows, which include Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, Power Rangers, the Marvel Universe, and the DC Universe, including the Emerald Echo podcast. You can check us out on Podbean, and remember to subscribe right here on YouTube. That's the Multiverse Musings Podcast Network. From the first podcast to the last.
And we're back.
Indeed we are, and we're back to continue our coverage of issues 4 through 6 of Green Lantern Rebirth. So Donnie, take it away.
Well, I want to highlight the cover of issue number 4 here. I like the coloring here because you see the letters green, the title Green Lantern, as well as the title of the story Rage and Revelations. It's all yellow, but outline in green. It's like yellow is the core influencing things outward.
Right. That was
I really like that little bit of storytelling there.
Cool design aspect. And it's cool when the logo gets in on the act of telling the story, much like it did in Jeff Thorne's run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about that with the battery imploding and then exploding and then being rebuilt. So another thing that I want to point out here that I really like is during the fight in the Watchtower here, I like the fact that Sinestro's using his ring, but he's not doing like usual combat poses. He has his arms folded like this is all beneath him. Like he, and he really hates Kyle Rayner, by the way.
Oh yeah, he hates him.
Man, the things he says about Kyle
Rayner. Some of the online Hal fans that just hate everybody that's not Hal.
Yeah. And, there were fans out there, I remember at the time, that said, Jeff Johns is disrespecting Kyle. I didn't see it that way.
I thought exactly the opposite, especially when Hal Jordan starts talking about him and teaming up with him, right?
Yeah. I thought all 4 of those characters were handled very well. Yeah. And I really liked Sinestro's disdain for him because Sinestro's like, I was that close to having the Green Lantern Corps die.
I was rid of you people, and then there's this one.
Yeah, and there's this one alley rat that just wouldn't let it die. Which I think, like I said, it all makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I like the description here of Sinestro. This really gives you a snapshot into his personality. His voice is alien, cold, and hollow, and his eyes, it's like trying to stare into the sun. Like, that's a cool description.
Yeah, it very much gives a sense of foreboding and imposing figure, and very dangerous. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, now, this was, a lot of people were confused, I think, at the time. How did Sinestro come back? That's, the question. What he says here is, you'd be amazed at the constructs Parallax is capable of. I tortured Jordan with many of them, and my quote-unquote death at his hands was the final stage of his susceptibility to the impurity. Now, I don't remember if it was a comic, and if there is a reference to this somewhere, please tell me where I read this. I think it was an interview that I read or watched. Jeff Johns confirmed that the Sinestro, in his continuity, the Sinestro that came out of the battery in Emerald Twilight was an energy duplicate, like a construct duplicate, and not the actual Sinestro. It was being controlled by Sinestro through the power of Parallax. But I don't remember exactly where I read that and which issue it was. So let me know. Let me know. I know that I read that somewhere that it wasn't the actual Sinestro we saw be killed on Oa.
Right.
So what were your thoughts when Sinestro showed up, being a new reader and new to the mythos?
Yeah, and just because I just read the stuff preceding it to get into Kyle, I was like, wait a minute, isn't he dead? So really, I mean, it's interesting when you're getting reacquainted with comics, right? And the only other death, there's only been other 2 deaths that you've read.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, 3 if you count Martha and Thomas Wayne, which we see once every,
Why'd you say that name?
once every 5 months. But just to remind us, but when the 3 deaths that you're accustomed to are Uncle Ben, Superman, and Sinestro, right? Because Superman came back, I guess I was like, wow, I guess he can come back, but it's like, how? And then it's like, his neck was snapped. So, like,
right.
how do you bounce back from that? I mean, just ask General Zod in Man of Steel. And mind you, he's my way, but how many times have we seen him since? So, I mean, who knows? But so that explanation, when it was revealed and Sinestro was talking about it being a construct, I'm like, I guess, look, if we're talking about comic mythologies, if anybody can get away with that as an explanation and you can let it slide and it'll make sense, it is the Green Lantern mythos. But, I think when I was just getting into it, between that and, finding out that Green Arrow had died and came back, I'm like, does anybody really die in any of these things? Or like, what's...
And to be fair, I've never asked him about this, but if I ever talk to Ron Mars, I want to ask this question someday. I don't think that he had that in mind. This is John's kind of retroactively, retconning this,
back
trying to make it work. Yeah.
Which now, in comic terms, is, for me as a reader, multiple decades in now, it's commonplace. It's like, they're just gonna, they'll change continuity when it fits their story needs. So it's fine.
Again, when you have an ongoing continuity, those things have to happen.
But back then, and keep in mind when that was happening, when Sinestro was coming back and all that, I was still reading from being a relatively new reader, and one of my first stories back was Dark Knight Returns, and seeing a 60-plus-year-old Bruce Wayne, and I'm like, well, they actually had the testicular fortitude, to quote Mick Foley, to age Batman. That's interesting. And then I realized, oh no, it's just an Elseworlds. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I was still kind of reeling from all these different terminologies and situations.
It's a lot to take it.
But now it's like an old hat. It's like, oh yeah, he'll be back.
Well, that's one of the reasons we do things like this, is to help people, to enhance that fan experience, because there's so much out there. It can be very intimidating.
Oh, it is. It's that's why I kind of, I'm a slave to the monthly floppies, but there's an element of me that prefers, picking up trades, because contained in that hardcover, there's the story. Yeah. If you never go back to that character again, you have a good beginning, middle, and end of a story.
Yeah.
So
back to, I do want to call out Sinestro's quote here. I like it. He, tells Kyle and Ollie, he's like, I bleed fear. What do you bleed?
Which is very,
again, we're talking about, Batman versus Superman.
Zack Snyder and Ben Affleck took that to heart. Do you bleed? And we sure as hell found out.
Mm-hmm. So another cool instance here. We see Ganthet squaring up with Parallax, and Guy and John, again, under the influence of Parallax here, they show up, and initially it looks like they're going to attack Ganthet, and he just kind of puts his hand behind him and says, let them be free of your filth, and uses the Green Lantern energy to
I love how
detox
easy it was for him. Just like, he's like, no, yeah, that's it. And I'm like, wait a minute. We've been here now for 4+ issues. Couldn't you have just done that right away? Well, I get why, because we need action scenes, but from an in-story point of view, why? Like, why let it get to the, just put out your hand and stop everything. Yeah. So,
well, at this point now, we see Kilowog and
I'm going to try that if the Leaf game's not going my way tonight. I'm going to put up my hand and let's see if it works, but probably not.
Let them be free of the curse. So at this point, we see Parallax. That would be interesting if Parallax got into Carol Ferris.
They got into a relationship, man. That's their ship name.
So Parallax squaring up with Ganthet, John, Guy, and Kilowog.
Yeah.
And Ganthet tells Parallax, "Oh, you have made many an enemy in Sector 2814," and they gather. And he's like, "You think I cannot handle 3 of your core members, Guardian?" He's like, "I do not speak of my appointed representatives, Parallax." And from behind Parallax, you then see the Justice League
the
and the
Teen
Justice
Titans,
Society.
the
Yeah.
JSA,
Yeah.
every friggin' team in the DC universe has descent. Like at that point, I'm watching it, looking at this back then and even again now, and I'm like, this is now a full-on lumberjack match. Like we have this, here we go.
So again, back in the Watchtower, Sinestro and Kyle are still fighting, and I just really like Sinestro's dialogue here. The ring was never meant for an alley rat like you. I mean, just the disdain, you can hear it.
Yeah.
But you know that, don't you, Kyle? You were never supposed to be a Green Lantern. And he's, Kyle, despite the fact that he's getting beaten up here, he's like, but I'm still a Green Lantern. And he continues to fight back. Now, we talked earlier about, the use of the ring. We actually see Green Arrow trying to use Hal's ring here.
Yeah, I alluded to this scene earlier.
Yeah, and it's really difficult because, again, Sinestro points out the fact, he's like, you're cynical. Yeah. And you don't know how to put your will into this. So he's able to make one arrow construct, but that's all. And then he mentions like feeling like he lost a week's worth of sleep.
Yeah, and he asked Kyle, is that what it feels like? He's like, every time. Yeah. And I like that bit of dialogue because it now gives you some, okay, this is not just point your arm and shoot, and it just willy-nilly and it happens like it's nothing. There is effort and exhaustion and all the things that occur when you're in a fight. It's not just as easy as, hey, look, I'm going to point and think, and it's just going to do what I want without any effort or repercussions afterwards. So right. I thought that was a very important small bit of dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So back in the big fight, we see that Parallax is ready to attack Alan Scott when suddenly Hal Jordan rips his way out of Parallax.
Yeah.
So we see that kind of, ripping of the flesh over and over again as they, fight for control. And John Stewart's even like, "What's happening?" And Jade's like, "Dad." And Alan Scott's like, "I'm not sure." It's like, "What's going on?" I'm not. But I like Ganthet.
I'm not like them. I just have the same weapon. Sort of.
Ganthet said, "Chose the wrong soul to corrupt." Yeah. Hal Jordan is still fighting. So yeah, I really like
that was his Hulk Hogan moment, where
right.
he's getting, and then he does the whole, Hulk up and takes over.
Yeah, well,
I would have paid to see the big boot to Parallax and the leg drop. With the construct of a leg, instead of.
Remember, Major Force gave the big boot to Kyle, so yeah.
And then stuck his girlfriend in the fridge, but I did.
Right. We'll get back to that now. So Hal Jordan's spirit is eventually able to separate him from Parallax. Now we see this in this panel here. Hal Jordan just kind of floating in ghost form, separate from Parallax.
Like he was going to heaven, yeah.
Right, separate from the Spectre.
Yeah.
Now, the Spectre just kind of leaves. He's like, I'm not yours to command, Hal Jordan.
Yeah, I like. There was that one part where Hal is like, "Help me," he's like, and then he sort of bonds with the Spectre, and he's like, "Don't confuse me for your ring."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you don't control me.
Yes, it was a very quick exit, and I understand that criticism, and I get that, but that also is kind of the way the Spectre acts.
Yeah, this doesn't concern me. I'm out.
Yeah, very aloof, very, very, focused on vengeance. And yes, I would have liked for him to have stayed a little while longer, and maybe Sinestro show up here or whatever. But the way things start to work here, I think it's really cool. So now at this point, Parallax infects Ganthet. And boy, is that upping the stakes here.
That's disturbing.
Yes.
Visually, that was disturbing.
Yeah. And at the same time, Cal, I got ready to say Cal. Hal is actually floating towards an afterlife, and Ganthet launches this green orb from his hand.
Yeah.
And he says, follow my light. And as Hal is kind of floating towards this afterlife, we see, characters from his past, Abin Sur, Ariz Jarab. And, Abin even says, you took control of my sector after my death. The ring chose you for a purpose. You will overcome great fear. Then we see Martin Jordan. He said, son,
you wear it well, yeah.
You wear it right, son. Now fly home.
Or the ring, or both. But
he says, now fly home.
Yeah.
And Hal starts to follow that orb instead of continuing to ascend.
Instead of going to heaven, he's like, oh, I'm not done yet.
Yeah,
wait,
right.
Hang on.
Instead of ascending to this,
I've had enough of the Spectre guy. I don't want any of that just yet. I'm going back to the...
Now, the end of this issue is some of my favorite... This might be my favorite Hal Jordan moment. Of course, with every Green Lantern, I kind of go back and forth on what's my favorite moment because there's so many of them.
Yeah.
But Kyle and Ollie are getting their butts handed to them by Sinestro. And he even says, beg for your lives, and I will end them quickly. And then we see in an exposition box, I wake up from a dream, and it's not Oliver talking. And the ring that's on Oliver's hand suddenly flies off. And we see the phrase, and I call to it. It comes as it always did, my weapon. And I love the look on Sinestro's face here as it flies past him. He's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you sort of, now we're getting the POV from inside the coffin, and we see the ring go to the hand.
Yeah.
And we see the gray hair go back to the normal color.
Mm-hmm.
So instantly I thought of a couple of things. One, when the hair goes back to brown, I'm like, this is basically a commercial for L'Oreal for men, the hair dye. They should have capitalized on that somehow.
Just for men.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. And so there's that. But again, I thought my analogy was frivolous at the beginning. But I'm telling you, the Undertaker analogy is really bang on. Like, think about it. We had Gathet, who's got this orb that says follow the orb. Is that not like Paul Bearer holding up the herbs?
Mm-hmm.
And then we see Hal Jordan sit up out of the coffin.
And wasn't that a great image, though? Hal Jordan rising up from the dead.
Yeah.
And backing up Kyle. And I loved the writing there of, Hal Jordan, he was dead. The ring comes to him and it reinvigorates him. And I just really love that. So
yeah.
And
so it was just great. And he's like, stay away from them. And that's all. That was the big ending of that issue. Was the heroic moment, the pose, the whole. It was a great splash page for sure.
Like as a Green Lantern fan, I really did kind of scream when I first read that the first time, and I was like, yeah,
I thought this was really, I thought it was really cool. Some of the issues, remember I said I had some issues in certain parts with the art. One of the things, it happened. Sometimes it was cool. It looked fine. Other times it looked wonky. But Hal Jordan's mask. There's certain points where it's drawn to perfection, and other points where it just looks weird.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
And I can't explain why.
Go ahead.
I can't put my finger on why there's a difference from one page to
And I'll say I think with the anatomy, some pages it looks great. Like I said, with Sinestro it looks great. Other pages, their limbs are too long and their torsos are too long and they look just kind of gangly and weird.
Yeah.
So I had some issues here, but now we see this pick up with Sinestro and Hal Jordan starting to fight one-on-one.
Right.
And even fighting into space.
That was really cool. I love that. Like the debris that they're having to navigate through looks really, really solid. Mm-hmm. It made you feel like this felt like the artwork for especially this sequence, the fight between Sinestro and Hal, was very cinematic.
And I really like this one exchange where Sinestro tells Hal, "You took the oath too seriously," and Hal's like, "You abandon it." That's kind of their forever struggle. Is their loyalty is Sinestro's past loyalty to the Corps and his abandoning of the Corps, and Hal Jordan, his adherence to the Green Lantern Oath.
Yeah.
So this was, I mean, it's one of my favorite Hal Jordan and Sinestro fights because they are just exchanging constructs and blows in the air. And, Sinestro laughs, "I made you a murderer, Hal Jordan."
I like the parts that made me laugh was when Hal's narrating and he's like, he's trash talking me. I can tell, but I can't hear him because he's too far away. It's like he's throwing it in his. Like, I know what he's doing. Like, I know his mind games, right?
Well, and here's an area, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but okay, so we see a flashback to the first time Hal and Sinestro met. And Sinestro's like, never challenge those more powerful than you. And Hal Jordan looks at him steely faced and is like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. In the movie, when they met and they fought and Hal Jordan ended up retreating from him, I'm like, Hal Jordan would never do that.
Yeah.
He can be getting his butt handed to him.
That should have been in the movie.
He's still not going to stop. That's the one thing Hal Jordan's never going to quit.
That should have been in the movie for sure. That scene. Because it would have gone a long way. The other thing is when Hal says that's not going to work for me, that was another Hulk Hogan reference because probably sometimes when they were booking him to lose, he's there and he's like, "That doesn't work for me, brother."
Exactly. That doesn't work for me, bro.
So I thought of that. That's what I thought when I read that. I was laughing because I thought of that.
So, and I adore this moment. So as they continue to fight, Sinestro's like, I'm going to finish you off, and then I'm going to go kill Kyle Rayner. Yeah. And Rayner is a fool.
He's obsessed with him, amazing. Yeah, a sick obsession.
Yeah. Well, and he even says here, "I will slice the creature's chest open and rip out his useless heart."
Like I'm imagining he went to bed at night, like dreaming of ways to kill him.
He must have.
But listen, eventually Kyle gets one up on him. Not just in this fight.
Doesn't he?
Not just in this fight. He does the horizontal fun with his daughter. So take that, Sinestro.
Yeah, exactly. So, guess what? Your grandkid.
I love it.
And Hal says, "No, you will respect him." And from behind, like Sinestro did to him, Kyle attacks. It's like Green Arrow says hi, and he hits him with a bunch of arrow constructs in the back.
And seeing them team up to fight him is pretty awesome.
Oh, wasn't that cool, man? Yeah.
And funnily enough, the scene where they do shake hands, again, I'm going to use a wrestling analogy. That was like the uniting of the mega powers for me.
Mm-hmm.
When Hogan and Savage did the handshake. Although it wasn't as drawn out as that was. The 3-minute handshake. It's like, come on, we just get on with it.
Well, and what we see is that as Hal and Sinestro go literally ring to ring, it says that his ring shatters, and we see Sinestro literally disintegrate, and he's sent back to the Quardian universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like how they're like, is he dead?
Yeah. And it says here, and of course, Kyle doesn't know what that is. And Hal even says that the antimatter universe, it's where he was first banished when his ring was forged. Yeah. And now we can't track him anymore.
And when they're using those codes, right, like how with the ring, and it really does sell the space cop angle, the cop angle of it all, right?
But the handshake you're talking about, I really love that image when Hal's like, "Let's do this right." Yeah. I'm Hal Jordan, and yes, they had met before, and with
but he was Parallax,
Hal is Parallax, but to see them here, one-on-one shaking hands for the first time,
and that should unite the fandom of the two characters, but you know how comic book fandom is.
All right. Believe me, and Green Lantern might be worse than some, because everybody has their favorite. Yeah. So now back on Earth, we still have the problem of Parallax having infected Ganthet. Yeah. Now, Hal and Kyle arrive, and Hal says, "Polish off your rings and let's stand together." And he says, "Light them up. Let's go do this." And of course, Batman's like, "Nah, wait a minute, Jordan." And that's how the issue ends, is with Batman using his grappling hook to wrap it around Hal Jordan's ring hand and hold him there.
Which won't last long.
Which leads to a moment in issue number 6 that has been talked about ad nauseum among Green Lantern fans and Batman fans, who some people loved it, some people hated it, but they talk about it forever.
Yeah, it's funny because I get it, and he probably deserved that shot.
Mm-hmm. And I will say this, later on, Batman, he returns the favor. He cold cocks Hal when Hal's not ready.
Yeah.
He's like, now we're even.
You know what it's like? Their relationship reminds me very much of the Hulk and Thor dynamic in the Avengers movies.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, from Hal's point of view, Batman deserved that, but also from Batman's point of view, I understand his trepidation as well. So, you see it from both sides. The funny part about it is, the way the other Lanterns react, like they're shocked.
Especially when Hal turns around, and for those of you who don't know, Hal turns around and drops Batman with one punch.
Yeah.
I mean, just cold cocks him. And the look on Guy Gardner's face, and because Batman's like, we're not done, and Hal cold cocks him and says, right now we are, let's go, Lanterns. And Guy says, Hal, I've always liked you.
Yeah. From
despite the fact that I tried to kill you in the past.
From bad-mouthing him 3 issues before that, and now he's...
I mean, he and Hal went at it how many times, but again, Lanterns, and Guy in particular, he's had his issues with Batman. Seeing Hal drop Batman made Guy feel pretty good. So
yeah.
Yeah. So this is the end of this story, this issue. It was 6 issues, and to see all of the Lanterns reunited as Lanterns.
Yeah.
All of the 4 titular characters, again, not counting Alan Scott, although he was there, but they all fight together with Kilowog against Parallax.
Yeah, and Alan Scott has an important thing in basically saying, he tells the Justice League, stand down, let them handle it.
Let them handle, and I love that. That's another thing that I like.
Which shows you that, like, some things should be a Green Lantern situation. Some things should be a JL situation.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they exist in the same universe and continuity doesn't mean, as a fan, I always have to see the Justice League intervening in Green Lantern business, and vice versa. I don't always have to. I know there's a Green Lantern typically on the Justice League team, but I don't necessarily need to see all 4 human Green Lanterns in a Justice League book.
Well, I do remember some fans at the time were like, "Oh, the Justice League didn't do anything," and I'm like, "That's because it's called Green Lantern Rebirth."
Yeah, exactly. So, so I like that aspect of it, and that seeing them form up and say the oath and form that wall against Parallax as a new reader, that was pretty cool. It gets
and boy, did Parallax look evil here inside of Ganthet, and says, "I'll spit on your souls."
Yeah, I'm telling you, he's got issues. But no,
that's a good way to put it.
I gotta tell you, it's really going back and thinking about my reaction when I first read it. You gotta understand that I'm reading a story that is now chronicling, or I was reading a story chronicling the one Green Lantern. I had, virtually no experience other than seeing Hal's Parallax with the others that much, right? So now to see, what are there, 5 human Lanterns at this point?
If you count Alan Scott, yes.
Okay, so 4 to 5.
Yeah.
when I was just concurrently reading the books with one, it was a little weird because it's like, oh, okay, there's so much more than to the stuff that I started reading. But in a way, I wasn't confused because I was getting peppered with information and histories about all of them. Enough that I could,
giving you a little bit, giving you a scoop here and there. That's the way that
very
John's
well
paced this.
It was very well put together for new readers. Like, it was very new reader friendly, I think.
So, and I like it, and it's what you said earlier. You get the descriptions of the way each one uses the ring, how their personalities affected. And then we see them start to say the Green Lantern Oath, each one saying a particular line.
Piece of it, yeah.
Yeah. Brightest day and blackest night, no evil shall escape our sight. But those who worship evil's might, beware our power, and all of them shout together, Green Lantern's light.
Yeah. And there's a moment where, as he's saying the line, Guy giggles.
Right? Yeah. He's like, this feels good again.
Yeah. And they defeat. They defeat Parallax.
And I really like, Parallax, again, very powerful, especially in the body of a Guardian. And he's like, give up. And Jordan says, I don't know how. I don't know how to give up. I'm going to keep going until I either win or I die. And that's how Jordan's personality.
And he's done both. So he has experience in both.
Yeah. And again, I will call out the artwork here. I think these panels especially look really good, as well as the coloring.
Oh,
the coloring looks really good.
The coloring is fantastic.
So Hal, Jordan, and the Lanterns managed to put Parallax back into the central power battery. And we see the Guardians, by the way, if you remember, it was Green Lantern number 150, I remember. That's when Kyle relit the battery and we saw the Guardians reborn. So even though they were dead at the end of Emerald Twilight, with the exception of Ganthet, we see them here again. So if you missed that gap, that's why the Guardians are back here.
Right. And then after all that, there's a moment where, again, John and Guy, where John's like, for a guy that doesn't want to be a Green Lantern, you seem pretty happy about it.
Yeah, Guy kisses his ring, and Guy's like,
and he goes,
John's like, I thought you didn't miss the ring.
He goes, I lied.
I lied.
He's a riot.
Yeah. Now, once again, Batman is still not happy about the thing, and so he confronts Hal Jordan. He's like, do you expect me to believe this? And Hal's like, I don't expect you to believe anything, and honestly, I don't care.
And then Batman's response was, well, for now, we'll leave it alone. He goes, I guess the universe could use a little bit more light.
Yeah. I've always found that very interesting, the way that Batman has kind of this frenemy vibe going on with all of the Lanterns.
There, but it's like I guess part of it is not only are they using different modes of operation, that wouldn't be really a sticking point for Batman in the sense that Superman uses hope and light and positivity to get the job done, right? So that I don't think that's the issue. I think part of it from the Batman point of view is, okay, if you have this guy who he's a human like I am, he watched his father or his parents, in Batman's case, die in front of him like I did. He's found a way to overcome that in a way that he can use positivity and light and hopefulness. Whereas Batman's overcome it too, but he's had to use the pain, the darkness, the fear to get his job done. So maybe there's a bit of, I don't think jealousy is the right word, but it's like envy is like, part of me wishes that I could get to that place where I didn't have to, resort to certain methods, but he'll never admit that, right? It's like the same with him and Clark, right? Where he'll never admit that Clark's way works, but conversely, Clark will never admit that Batman's way also works. Like in some cases, Batman's way works, and I think Hal's the same way. He knows.
Well, speaking of, Hal looks at John and says he's right, isn't he? And John, looking very loath to actually admit this, is like, yeah, he usually is.
The thing for the Lanterns is they cannot go there, because if they do, there's the fear of, will Parallax corrupt us or whatever. So they don't allow themselves to go to the fear angle, because that's a more of a nemesis for them than an advantage.
Well, and remember, the Green Lanterns, even when they're alone, they work with the Guardians and they work as a unit under a certain code. Batman works under his own code.
Batman has about 5 to 7 people that he trusts. Everybody else,
right?
And even with his own people, he's got files on them. He's got like his Robins. Like he doesn't. It won't take much to have him start mistrusting them, right? So it's just their circumstances are the way they've handled their situation that led them, that similar situation. The way they handled it has led them down different paths. They're accomplishing the same end game, but it's just the path they take to get there is different. And I don't know that a Green Lantern would necessarily thrive in Gotham City against those kind of criminals. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be a Green Lantern's power level, you could think they could take them out. But at the same time, the investigative side of...
but then they become murderers. If they could just start taking out humans with their rings, a Green Lantern wouldn't work there unless it's a more extraterrestrial based villain, right? Whereas if you're dealing with something like Scarecrow, turn the fear back on him and see how he likes it.
Right. So the story ends, and fittingly, I like this. We see Hal reunited with Carol, and she says, you're not so cold anymore. And then we see Hal and Ollie reunited, and Ollie gives Hal his battery back and says, I still can't remember that oath. And Hal fittingly says, I'll never forget it.
I love their friendship. I really do. I got to say, they
I'm glad he was included. I would have liked to see Barry included more in this story. That's another criticism that I have.
Yeah, that's true.
And some people may say I'm asking for too much, but that's the way I feel.
No, I think that's fair, considering that those are the two people that Hal is closest to. But I did like that ending, and I sort of like that he got to reconnect with Oliver there, and it was a really cool ending, and it just made me regret the fact that we never got Hal Jordan in Arrow
or on the Flash. Two golden opportunities.
Yeah. Like the Oliver Barry relationship in the Arrowverse is essentially the Oliver Hal relationship in the comics. That's essentially what they've done there, right? So it's my hope is that in James Gunn's DCU, we know we're getting Green Lantern. I hope we get a Green Arrow, and I hope that friendship is explored. I'd love what's it called? Hard Traveling Heroes adaptation with Green. Imagine a movie with Green Arrow and Green Lantern.
I would love it.
Or a miniseries of some sort.
I would love to see Kyle and Connor Hawke. Hard Traveling Heroes, the new generation.
Again, there's ways to go about it, and with a 10-year plan in place, you can get a lot done, right? So.
I would also love to see Radu's, by the way, for those of you watching and not just listening. Yeah, Radu.
He should be in the show, I think. That'd be a cool nod, right?
I love Radu.
If he was in the show, in the Lantern show, that'd be cool. Like, imagine John and Hal, while they're investigating whatever case they're going to be on, stop in at Radu's and
Get a cup of coffee, and yeah.
And even we have a cameo from a as yet not Green Lantern. Kyle would be cool. Like,
all he's got to do, yes, just sitting there doodling.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
the bar, you know.
And then Radu says, "Kyle, you need anything else?" That's enough for now.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are lots of things. But I gotta say, reading this story, like I was coming in on the ground floor with this as opposed to trying to jump in after the fact with Kyle. So this really sparked my. I mean, I love Kyle, and I like his take on the story, his profession. I think he's a really cool character. His youth, I think, is why he's my favorite, and like the types of stories they tell with him. But this book and watching Hal's journey back to being a Green Lantern really, I think, catapulted my Green Lantern fandom. Like, if it wasn't for this story and the Jeff Johns run that preceded it, I don't know if I'd rank Green Lantern in my top 5 of DC characters. Like, I mean, Kyle would have always been cool had I stuck with that story, but I don't know if it would have gone from where it started as a casual recommendation to, being third on my list of favorite DC characters.
Well, this really, when Kyle was born, okay, as a character, I mean, when Mars and Banks came up with him,
I was going to say, what kind of backstory are you drawing in?
That condensed the Green Lantern mythos. Now you see it open back up again.
Yeah.
Both of these are great. Volume 3 from issue 48 on is my favorite run all time of comics. Yeah. I love this too, because this opened us up to the emotional spectrum, lots of new characters, and believe it or not, you can like more than one thing.
Oh, there's elements to each lantern that I enjoy. Like there's it's not just Kyle or John because of the cartoon or whatever, or Hal because of Rebirth. There's something about each person's character that I can gravitate to, right? And so what I think this, like, Kyle, if you get into Kyle on the ground floor, it makes it easier because there's less to digest at one time. But what Rebirth does, to me, is it gives DC, again, when Dave recommended the Green Lantern mythology to me, he said very simply, in the easiest way I can tell you what it's about, it's a mashup of Superman meets Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah. It's a good way to put it.
So now, with the reopening up of the mythos and all the expansion that Jeff Johns did, the book was doing so well that we got 5 titles at one point. So it shows you how popular Jeff Johns' writing and stories were. It gives DC something that's Star Wars level exciting, and on the printed page, that's great, and for the upcoming live action universe, that's great as well. And so I think that's what Rebirth did. Rebirth also, I think, gave Warner Brothers the sales for Rebirth, I should say, because the executives didn't read jack shit. But the sales for Rebirth, clearly, if you watch them, the sales for Rebirth allowed them to sort of want to try a Green Lantern movie. If Rebirth doesn't come along, I don't think we get that first Green Lantern movie when we get it.
Green Lantern, for a while, there was a time when Green Lantern
was outselling Batman.
Yeah, was kind of almost the center of what was going on in DC.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was very innovative, the ideas that were put forth. And a lot of people came along later, Green Lantern Corps, and we got, a Sinestro title, a Larfleeze title, Green Lantern New Guardians. These were all, put in place. It started right here, the building blocks for all of that.
Yeah. And so to say it is, I think it's if you, I don't know that I'm comfortable ranking Green Lantern stories in terms of importance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is just as important of a story as, you know, the OG Green Lantern that introduced the concept, even though it's a little different, or the first issue featuring Hal Jordan. Like again, this book is so important for the characters, the IP, and for comics, because, like I said, if not many books at DC. Well, now I don't know if there are any, but when you're out selling Batman, you're doing something right, because it's very rare that any books do that on the DC side of the aisle. So, and you got to give credit where credit is due.
Emerald Twilight shook up the status quo.
Yeah.
And a lot of new Green Lantern fans were made. 10 years later, the same thing happened. The status quo was shaken up, and we see, again, a new generation of people who may not have been interested in Green Lantern before. Now they get to come back to this.
And these are all great things. Like
yeah.
What it is it's an entry point for new fans. And if you could just look at it like that and know that it doesn't, whatever they do in the next, the next shakeup, the next iteration, it's not going to take away your favorite stories. All we're doing is bringing in new people. Because look, when Kyle was the main Green Lantern, everybody thought, oh, well, that's it. And then Hal came back, right? And we had, now with Jeff Thorne's run, John Stewart took the lead. And guess what? In May, Hal's coming back. So all if anything, all these different iterations, these different versions of the title, starring different lanterns, all it does is bring more people to this fan base. That should be something that we're celebrating.
Right. I would agree.
Now the onus is on DC Comics as a publisher to, the focus is back on Hal. Let's not forget about the other guys. Let's have them have a presence.
Well, and we are, we're going to have another series with John Stewart.
Yeah.
To launch out of this series.
Yeah. And Kyle and Guy are apparently in Doom Patrol.
Doom Patrol.
So if there's ever any time I'm going to read Doom Patrol, it's probably while they're in the book, because I'm not really a fan of those characters. But
I'm definitely going to pick that issue up. So for issues, I'm not sure exactly how long it'll be there.
I don't know how long they are. But so for this, Donnie, is there any? Should we just go ahead and rate it? Because I think we covered everything. So
yeah, go ahead. Do you want to rate it first?
Yeah. So how we do it here is 5 for story and 5 for art. I'm going to say it's a 4.5 for story. Like you, I wish there was more, just if they had a little bit more Barry Allen, more of a reunion with those two, and he had more of a presence than just, let me go check out his little apartment.
Right, yeah.
Right. That would have put it to a 5, I'll be honest. And then the art-wise, I'm going to say 3.5, because while most of it was fantastic, there were those moments where the anatomy looked wonky at times, or Hal's mask looked wonky at times.
Mm-hmm.
So, 3.5. So, we're looking at an 8 when you add 4.5 and 3.5. Mm-hmm. If my math is working, that's an 8 out of 10. So,
for me, I'm going to say art. I'm pretty much where you are. I'm going to say 3.5. There were a lot of things that it looked good. It looked really good at some points, and there were a few things that didn't work for me. I mentioned some of the anatomy, some of the expressions weren't perfect, I thought. For the writing, I'm going to give it a 5, despite the fact that I do have issues. But what was done was so important to this mythos growing that I think it kind of erased those, despite the fact that they're there. Now, obviously, for instance, I like the fact that Guy became a Green Lantern again. I think that Johns could have gotten there with a little bit more creativity. Then he exploded, and now he's a Green Lantern again. Okay, all right, that's not. I think that's a little clunky.
Yeah.
But what came after the fact, with all of them reuniting to battle Parallax, I just think in the end that's why I'm going to give this a 5.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's definitely warranted for sure. And so, with that, we've covered Rebirth, and the next time you hear us talking about Green Lantern, we will actually be reviewing Green Lantern #1.
Mm-hmm. And you'll see me with a whole bunch of variant covers.
The 2023 edition, because we have to clarify.
Right.
So I've lost count how many Green Lantern #1s there are. God forbid anybody sticks to the legacy numbering, except when it's a big issue that they can charge $10 for. But I'm not there. That Batman 900 is coming up, and then it's going to go back to Batman 136 or whatever the hell the number preceding 900 is going to be. But yeah, I'm excited to read that. I'm looking forward to it. You know, every hero is only as good as his greatest villain, and to see the next round of the battle between Hal Jordan and Sinestro is going to be pretty fun. So,
you know, Johns really took Sinestro to a different level too.
Yeah.
And he was already important, but I really, again, the introduction of the Sinestro Corps, where that went, I think was a very logical step for the character.
Right. Yeah, and so now to see in 2023 where that fight picks up, and how writer Jeremy Adams and artist Zermanico, I think it is, pick up on that. That's going to be exciting. So come back and join us for that in a couple weeks' time. But in the meantime, you can always talk to us about Green Lantern. So, Donnie, where do they track you down?
You can find me on Twitter and TikTok as the Emerald Enthusiast, as well as YouTube. You can find lots of Green Lantern reviews. Let's talk comics. Let's talk collectibles. Let's talk Green Lantern.
And you can find me at Adam_LeafsFan on Twitter. The podcast network has its own social media handle at MMNPDC. We have a Facebook group listed in the description below. Click that. I will add you. We can continue the conversation there. But until next time, remember that Green Lantern and Hal Jordan as Green Lantern is forever. From his first #1 issue to the last. So long, everybody.
So long, everyone.